Oh, that light is bright. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for the introduction, Linduwe. Thank you very much to the organizing committee for inviting me. It is a real pleasure. I chose to be here in person after 3 years of lockdown, 2 years of lockdown and 3 years of online. I think it's very important for us to see people face to face, to have this engagement. Today, I am speaking as a researcher. My field is coronavirology. So I've worked on coronaviruses since 2003. I started working on coronaviruses during the first epidemic caused by SARS, and I worked for 3 years in Singapore on SARS. And since then, I've been working on this virus family that has caused this disruption the past 3.5 years. I'm also a leader. I'm a manager because I'm a dean at a university, but I'm also a qualified coach. I completed an MPhil in management coaching at Stellenbosch Business School 2019. So hopefully today you will see those three spheres of my life, my professional career, reflected in my presentation. Initially, I had this as, are we ready for the next pandemic? And I thought, you know what? Whenever I mention that, people are freaked out because the next pandemic is coming. And I'll talk about that very briefly in the end. But let's look at the next disruption. Are we ready for the next disruption? I think by now everybody knows that little picture. We've seen it everywhere. This is the little thing that caused the lockdown. And there was only officially, the pandemic was officially declared over by the WHO only 2 weeks ago on a Friday. And I was contacted by a reporter to say, what does this mean for the man on the street? And I said, absolutely nothing. The only thing that it does mean for us is that those countries with travel restrictions still in place, where you needed a vaccine, that will probably change now, but everything else stays the same. This virus is still around. It's become endemic now, which means that it's found in the human population, and this is not unusual. We know of 7 human coronaviruses identified to date. This was the 7th one. 6 of those are endemic. They circulate, and they were first identified in 1962, 1963. So we've known about these for a long time. In 1905, the first coronaviruses were identified from animals. So it's always been a huge problem in agriculture, animal agriculture. So this thing is now doing what all coronavirologists thought it would be doing, become endemic. So it's still a problem for those who have comorbidities. So if you have symptoms and you have comorbidities, please have it checked out. I know you go to your doctor and doctors do not test anymore because everybody's tired of testing. I had to ask my doctor to be tested. So be warned, this thing is not gone. This is how we ended up here. There's some very clear evidence now that this virus comes from a raccoon dog in a Chinese wet market. Somebody was infected in the Chinese wet market and it spread worldwide because of global travel. Very similar to how it spread the flu from 1908, First World War, Spanish flu, thank you, Spanish flu. My students would crucify me for not remembering that. The Spanish flu at the end of the First World War, how did that spread? Why was South Africa the most affected country in the world? Young soldiers returning by ship. And then in South Africa, with a very good railway system, it spread throughout the country. So very, very similar type of spread. Now imagine with the ease of travel we have now, how easily this thing spread. I know that the debate is still about a lab leak from China in Wuhan. I've been asked this many times. So in the first 2 years of the pandemic, I had in excess of 505 media engagements. And one of the most common questions that I had was, is this biological warfare? My answer has always been categorically no. Is it a lab leak? Accidental? We don't know. Could be. We had something similar in 2004 in Singapore. PhD student working in the laboratory on a different virus, student that worked just before him used the laminar flow for SARS. This person worked in West Nile, did not decontaminate the area, became infected and took it to his community. Only 2 people were infected. So an accidental lab leak, yes, but I think the evidence is fairly clear that it came from a wet market. Is it a biological weapon? I do not think so. There's no clear evidence. You would not create a biological weapon that would only kill older people predominantly and those with comorbidities. Does not make sense. I should not libel myself here, but if you want to create a biological weapon, you take out the economically active population group. That's what influenza did, and that's what influenza does. Was this unexpected? This was an op-ed I wrote in 2013 on the then fifth human coronavirus identified, MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus, and it was identified in the Middle East, spread worldwide to 27 countries, still circulating currently, but predominantly in the Arabian Peninsula. To date, since 2013, 2012, only 3,000 people infected. The bad thing is that it has a mortality rate, so a kill rate of 37%. Imagine that thing spreads easier from human to human, so if you have mutations. So in 2013, I wrote an op-ed. And in this op-ed, I make that comment. There is a growing need for greater research into this virus. Fear remains that SARS will make a comeback, the one that I worked on in 2003, 4, and 5, or that we will find a new coronavirus other than MERS that spreads easily and becomes a worldwide problem. Our globalized jet-setting world is a boon to any virus with world domination on its mind. But dramatic, but that's what happened. A year after this, the WHO had a workshop and they published a list of pathogens that could be the next pandemic cause. Coronaviruses was identified with one of those. So it was an extremely frustrating time to me when we have this pandemic starting and we're all claiming we did not expect this. This is something new. We should have been prepared. And that's why the importance of these type of engagements, I think. Let's just look at what is the impact on student experience. If you read through those, each one of you sitting here comes from a university or an institute. Each one of you can say that this is what you saw at your university. Differential treatment of students based on their background. What do we mean by that? This is UNESCO report. So this is a global phenomenon. We saw very clearly that the economic divide during this pandemic was highlighted. Those who had, they were prepared. Those who did not have, they were unprepared. And universities had to run around to equip those who could not afford to be equipped. Closed access to knowledge and research results, publications. And I'm going to touch on this later. There's a huge competition in science. And I'm actually embarrassed to admit that there's a huge competition in science. Why did we find a solution to COVID so fast, a solution to SARS in 2006 so fast, and we've not found a solution to HIV? The difference between the two, cooperation between researchers and those and non-cooperation. I think the one who finds the solution to HIV will very likely be a Nobel laureate. So science, for some reason, we keep our cards very close to our chests and we do not share information. In these two huge instances where we shared information, we prevented mistakes from being repeated, so everybody could start and continue as though we're all working together. So I think that's the solution. Lack of access to basic requirements, I think that links with the first, and I've touched on that fourth one. I'm going to go very fast through these first ones because I would like to get to the slides that I think is very pertinent to us in this room today. So that was the impact on students. What was the impact on staff? There were positive effects. And this was taken from a paper, and the reference is right on top, was published in BMC. There were positives. If you speak to especially older academics, they will say, we were to find how do you graduate an anatomist that has never seen a cadaver or dead body before in front of him? He's never made an incision in a body. So what has happened to those students? Uncertain students' learning achievements. So I don't even have to explain this. When we went back face to face, students were complaining because they were saying, and for some reason they were brave enough to admit this, how can you bring us back? Because we were all working together, so we all could essentially cheat. And those were the words that the student used. Students have become very, very bold. So what type of confidence do we have in the students that we have graduated or produced? They're unable to ensure fair assessment, that links with that, and then the uncertainty of. So you can see it's around assessment, but something that I think that we forget, and this is where the coach in me comes out. What do you think is one of the biggest forgotten effects of this pandemic? What is one of the biggest ones that we've forgotten? Mental health, you're correct. I went to a conference in 2018 in Europe, and the presenter said the following. This is pre-pandemic. When we look at academics, when we look at support staff at universities, there's work-related stress, high workloads, often unattainable performance evaluation processes. I'm a dean. I still have my 5 criteria that I need to perform in: community engagement, publications, institutional leadership, faculty, professional leadership, not teaching and learning anymore, but research. I need to produce 100% in each one of those. Is that unattainable? The competitive environment in academia, everybody has heard of publish or perish, and we'll touch on that again a bit later. And then contract of employment. In Europe, very, very difficult to get permanent positions. They're looking at 5 years, and then you reassess. Difficult. Pre-pandemic, what has this led to? The speaker in that conference stated that the issues of mental health has been the highest in Europe that they've ever seen. They were talking about 30, 40, 50% of members of staff at universities having some form of mental illness. And mental illness is real. Let's not just get over it, it's a real issue. Then we have the pandemic. Sudden demand to adjust to an online teaching environment. If you've not done this for 30 years you've used a whiteboard, you've used a marker on a whiteboard, you've now been expected to go online. In many cases, after an email from your management that you're going online tomorrow. Okay? Ambiguous boundaries between work and home, which we're still struggling with. I've given a very clear directive that everybody should be back on campus. We do have a flexi work policy. So if you can perform from home, why should you be on campus? And I think all of the directors and deputy directors in this meeting probably has the same issue. People are now saying, but we could work from home. Why are we expected to be back? Social disconnect with students, social disconnect with each other. We are social beings. Additional administrative duties, limited organizational support. Something that's not on here. How about all of a sudden the workday went from 8:20 to 4:30 to 5 a.m. till about 1 minute past 12 a.m. Because all of a sudden we could be contacted at any time because it was online. So what has that resulted in? Now let me just go back. So this has resulted in a huge increase in mental health issues amongst staff and amongst students. What is the next? So yes, the pandemic has been declared over. Are we still struggling with the pandemic, the after effect of the pandemic? Everybody has heard of long COVID. This is a real thing. If you look at the definitions, differs drastically. We still do not understand this. So how do you treat something that you do not understand? Looking at the literature, the human body has between 10 and 12 organ systems. So what makes us, the brain, pulmonary system, digestive system, reproductive system, between 10 and 12. long COVID could be any one of 205 symptoms. In any one of those symptoms, in any one of those systems, sometimes in multiple systems, about 6 months after you've recovered from from COVID. How do you identify, how do you treat anything from 205 symptoms? And yes, it's real. I suffer from long COVID. So at the very early in the morning, after 4 in the afternoon, I try not to arrange meetings because the brain doesn't work the way it should. I've gone from running virtually every day to not being able to run in Johannesburg. I can still run in Cape Town because the pulmonary system has been affected. It's typically 1 in 5 people who have been affected by COVID. More often than not, those with severe COVID develop long COVID. However, so 1 in 5, 20%. Some studies, some population groups, up to 50%. It's a huge number. What are you doing as the leadership and for people who report to you to be sensitive to this? Please keep that in mind. So just a summary of what has changed. Look at that second main bullet point. Female staff and staff with comorbidities. Research consistently has shown that those two were the most affected during the pandemic when it comes to mental health. Why? Female staff are typically the primary caregivers at home. So you had to give work from home, be 100% mommy at home, be 100% partner at home, be 100% giving to your university, and you had to publish. Imagine the effect on mental health. Staff with comorbidities, self-explanatory. Staff with comorbidities, people with comorbidities were at a much higher risk of dying. So look at the one study. People are in, versus 2018, people are more likely, 8 times more people to screen positive for severe mental health issues. 70% of participants versus 22% in 18 in this study, meeting the criteria for serious to moderate mental health issues. What are we as leaders doing to keep this in mind when we engage with our staff? Difficult, but keep this in mind, please. So what has changed? So this is important for us. Have we seen that term before? Right at the start, the WHO said we are dealing with a pandemic, but sadly, we're dealing with an infodemic as well. And the infodemic happened when the confidence in academia, in science, was at its lowest. In 2018, a study from Australia did a global assessment of the confidence in science of the population, of the public. Only 25% of participants indicated confidence in what scientists are saying. So now, if the public is not trusting scientists for information, where do they go? Social media. So the majority of my interviews that I did, and I did television, I did live call-ins, those live call-ins were very interesting because the majority of those dealt with this infodemic, this deluge of information, and the public is not equipped to filter what is true and what is not. Even scientists came and gave differing opinions. So how do we communicate? I had one of the most popular questions were, is 5G responsible for COVID? It was a huge thing. The infodemic. So it became a huge problem. Mentioned social media, and it can be stopped. Just look at that very, very quickly. That's how social media can really blossom. Let's put a positive spin on it, but also the negative. If we stop it by proper information, we can really diminish the impact of information sharing. So how do we as universities play a role in this space? And what is your role as leadership of library, of those working in libraries? I think we lost 20, and this is not us versus them, but I think universities lost the plot during Fees Must Fall because the students dominated on social media. Anything they said on social media was taken as truth, and universities were too scared to respond to those. So when the pandemic happened, universities were too scared to respond to social media. Why are we not engaging? Why are libraries not becoming a trusted source on social media? What does that look like? This was written 4th of June 2020. Author Anthony King contacted me, did a few interviews with me. He's from the States. Contacted me, and I mentioned my concern about preprints. And he said, that's a very interesting, maybe I should do an article. So I was interviewed for this one. So in 2014, 4th of June, right at the start of the pandemic, I said, I'm concerned about preprints. Do you know what preprints are? You librarians, you should know what preprints are. Good. So this was published in EMBO, Popular Journal, was picked up by other news outlets as well. The first year of the pandemic, more than 200,000 articles were published, COVID-related publications were published. Look at the number of estimates. Nearly 40,000 of those were preprints. If you look at all preprints, it says that about a quarter of all preprints, a quarter of all publications, a quarter of those were preprints. That's a huge number. What's the problem with that? I'm concerned about preprints. There are some very good studies that are now saying the majority of preprints, if you look at them and you look at the final published peer review paper, they're the same. Data doesn't change much. I don't have a problem with that. We do preprints. The problem is in preprints that are not done at the same time when you submit your article for peer review. You don't have to wait for peer review. So if you go to MDPI and you submit your paper, there is a button that says, a hyperlink that says, do you want to submit this for preprint? You can say yes. So while it's being, and it gets a DOI and the works. So while your paper is being reviewed by experts, it will go into the public domain with the DOI. People can read, people can engage, which is a good thing. What about those where there is no official paper that's under review and you submit? We've done that. Right at the start of this pandemic, I told a PhD student of mine, this is very important work that we're doing. However, other people will be doing the same work. Let's protect your thesis, your PhD work. Let's publish a preprint. And it was published as a preprint. We only submitted a paper 2 years later, drastically different from that. And our preprint was picked up by news media all over the world, and it was reported on. What if we were unethical? So very often in my interviews, I would have, but this article says, Donald Trump quoted scientific papers. Many of those were preprints. Many of those had to be retracted. That's the problem with preprint. What are you as libraries doing to work and manage preprints effectively? You can't do all of them, but what about the ones from your university? At UWC, we have a repository. Great. We have our work open access. Great. What are we doing about preprints? So maybe we should look at that. So yes, about 90%, 95%, depending on the data, on the paper, says that the vast majority of preprints stay true once they are peer reviewed. I'm not concerned about those. And it shouldn't be that easy for us to control. More than half of preprints appeared on 3 sites only, and those were the 3 biggest ones. Everybody remember the remdesivir, or the drug for hydrochloroquine? Everybody remembers what was the one that they called the horse drug? Remember those? Ivermectin, thank you. I was a proponent of ivermectin. I had a problem with scientists coming and saying that ivermectin is not safe. You can't be using something for 15 years for different use and say it's not safe. Communication, I'm going to get to communication now. We had to say that we know it's safe. We do not know whether it's effective for treating COVID. There's a difference between those two. See why we're not trusting scientists? Because of the words that we use. We should be careful. Typically as scientists, typically as staff members, we're very proficient in writing things. So you see some of my opinion pieces over there, some of them in national newspapers, some of them in local newspapers, The Conversation. We were very effective with those because we love writing. That's not good enough. We need to be playing in other platforms. So I really put myself out there. And in February 2020, a week after the pandemic was officially declared, I was invited. Live television, first time in a television studio. And I was asked, Professor Fielding, do you think we should worry about this one? And I said, you know what? If this goes the way of SARS in 2003, I don't think we should worry. We'll probably disappear in 6 months. Listen, a very long 6 months. Listen to my words. If we use what we know from the past, it will probably disappear in 6 months. A month later, I was re-interviewed. And I said, you know what? The data has changed. What we know now, this will probably be endemic. As scientists, as leaders from universities, as leaders of communities, why are we scared to say, this is my opinion based on current information? And when I stopped doing interviews, it just became too much. The attacks on social media, the accusations just became, so I withdrew from interviews. I was contacted by radio and television stations saying, our listeners and viewers are asking for you because you're not choosing sides. You're giving all information. And you're bold enough to say, this is my opinion. Right at the start, I said, do not introduce me as a COVID expert. You cannot be an expert if you've been studying something for 3 months because this thing has been around for 3 months. I would say introduce me as a coronavirus expert because I've been doing that for 20 years. There's a difference. So how do we communicate? We can communicate, you can communicate. What is the role of libraries to manage what we communicate and make that available? I think that's a very important question that you need to ask yourself, please. Coming to an end, what does the future hold? A virologist perspective. On the blue side, you see the huge previous pandemics we've had in the world. I mentioned the Spanish flu. See, I haven't forgotten Spanish flu again. Those were the 7 deadliest plagues. And on the gray block, you see the deadliest pandemics based on the population of the world and the death rate. So with the Black Death, bubonic plague, 51% of the world's population died. 51%. Plague of Justinian, 19%. Look right at the bottom, 0.08%. Whenever I teach this to my students, I say that is not a huge mortality rate. Even if we're saying that there are many silent deaths, worst case scenario says we have actually lost 20 million people. 20 million out of 8 billion. Every death is important. All of us has lost somebody. But was this a major pandemic? No. Based on mortality rate? No. 2003, we met with the CDC. Nobody knew what this thing was that was killing people because before then, coronaviruses were not killing people. And the CDC from the US met with us and said, we think this might be the next one, pathogen X. That's what we're looking for. And based on cycles, pandemic cycles, we're expecting the new one. So we thought it was 2003 SARS. It was not. Everybody remember swine flu? Everybody freaked out. It wasn't the big one. Everybody freaked out for this one. I kept on saying this is not the big one. I think the big one is going to be influenza. Influenza spreads very difficult between person to person, easily from birds to farmers and those handling those birds. Mortality rate of 37%, in certain cases 75%. If that mutates, we're in for trouble. So are we going to have a next pandemic? Very likely, but we should not focus on pandemics only. Let's focus on disruptions as well. Fees must fall is not done. What have we learned about managing being off campus? What is the role of the library? Many of you have very effectively gone offline. Now we're back. So that is not a challenge for you anymore. Should the challenge for you be, how do you manage effectively what we as researchers communicate to the community, to the public? Maybe that should be your role as well. Last night, I told Shalene that I always thought of, when I think of librarians, I think of these old stuffy people with the glasses over here. Oh, you guys can party. And obviously, you guys can work hard as well. After a party, the room is full. So what do you party animals who can work very hard as well? What do you see your role as? Has the role changed? It's not just about the space anymore. Maybe you should be more than just the custodians of books and of journals, etc. You are the custodians of information as well. What does that look like? I think it's changed, and I challenge you to look at this so that you can really, and my time is up. I just want you to look at the badge of UWC. It says Respice Prospice. To look back, to look forward. As I said, it was the most frustrating thing when researchers would come out and say, oh, we've just discovered that this virus spreads via droplets. And I would be doing an interview and they would ask me, are you surprised by this? I must say, no, we've known this. And the next question would be, so do we need to change anything? No, continue wearing your mask. It's not something new that the virus has learned to do. Something new that we've identified for this virus. So we've gone into this blindly without the need to be blind. So really, I would really challenge all of us to really look at what has happened this past. Fees must fall, multiple fees must falls, and the pandemic. What have we learned? What is the good that we're keeping? But more importantly, how do you support us as researchers, and how has your role changed? Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Prof. Fielding, for the reflections and also for pointing us into the future. I think we agree with you that disruption really is here with us. There's different forms of disruption, but how do we forge the future? And what lessons can we take forward? So colleagues, I think we'll open time for questions. I see a hand here and then here. Colleagues online, you're welcome to also pose your questions. Okay, so we'll take the two questions and then Prof will respond. Okay.
Thank you for a very enlightening talk this morning. I just want to ask, at the beginning of the pandemic, and I think it is from the WHO, they asked that all articles that's behind paywalls be opened. And big publishers, all the commercial publishers have opened, they designated articles as COVID-19, and then those articles for open access. Some libraries made these things available on their websites and made an effort. Do you feel that that has made a change to you as a researcher? That you did not need to find that articles you acquire were behind the paywall?
Do I take both or do I answer?
I think both.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Carieta from Stellenbosch. I want to know, how do you think knowledge management and knowledge transfer can be used in the library management system to get people to understand more what it is that they have to do and want to want to convey in the communication system that you mentioned?
Thank you. Made a huge difference. Many of our papers were then made public immediately, and the importance of that is to encourage the discourse. And I think much of that counteracted the incorrect information. I've always said that those who were purveying this false narrative, they were very intelligent. They would take a bit of truth, a bit of myth, and lots of lies, and combine all of that into a narrative. How do you counteract that type of narrative? By making information available. So from our side, but also from the public side, and also very importantly, for us to know what others have done meant that we did not have to go back to the start. Very often you would be doing work. I've done work 2003, where I would get to a conference and a PhD student from Germany comes to me and he says, "You're presenting this. Have you published this?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh no, my PhD is gone." Why? Why are we not sharing information? So that was a huge plus for us. Difficult knowledge management. When you speak to scientists about making information available, we become very defensive because of us trying to protect. But I think it's really about the benefits. I've been dean of this faculty for a year and 5 months now. Last year, we managed to publish 21 conversation pieces from my office where we've been working with researchers, and I made a science writer available to them. That prompted others to do exactly the same, and the amount of media coverage that we had was phenomenal. And how did I sell it to the researchers? Because many of them say, "But it's not important for my career." It's not important for your career, but it's important for your student's career. So what are you doing to give your student the best exposure? And typically that guilting works for them. So make them feel guilt. That's the easiest. It works because all of us are in academia, not for the amazing salaries. We're there because we care about the students.
Thank you very much, Prof. We'll take the question at the back, but before we do, I just want to remind colleagues who are online that you are welcome to pose your questions as well. We haven't seen questions from you. Then the question at the back, and I think there's a second question here. Oh, sorry, can I request that we just take the one online and then you'll be the second question. The one online says, "We're currently hoping to return to the old normal. Have we really learned from COVID? Are we currently adapting to find the balance in between?"
Can I just take that one? This one is very close to my heart. If we're going back to the old normal, we're going to make a huge mistake. The old normal will take us back to a comfort zone where we do not want to be. If we learned from 2003, this virus in 2003 spread to 27 countries globally. Only 8,000 people were infected globally, but 10% of those people died. So this was my second lockdown. This was my second pandemic. Why have we not learned? Because it did not affect South Africa. The only person that we thought was positive died at the airport after he landed, and it was put down as a heart attack. No. What is the new normal? That's the question. Keep the best from what we've just gone through, and then merge it with the old normal and find this new normal. We are in for future disruptions. We cannot recreate this wheel over and over. So please, 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 if you forget everything I've said today, remember that the old normal should not happen again. We cannot afford it as a sector in South Africa and globally. I think it will kill the sector, especially with AI and how it's impacting everything. So that's another discussion. But please, no old normal.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning. My name is Wynand van der Walt from Rhodes University. And it's actually not a question, but more comment to the audience. During that period, we did a study called Retracted COVID-19 Papers and the level of citation pollution. And I just want to also make sure that the librarians understand that with things like this, what happens is also opportunities for new research. And we as librarians can do a lot of research on what's happening. And in fact, it behoves us, the levels of citation pollution, and what we mean is the levels of pollution in pure sciences is a concern because it impacts on scholarly integrity. So as librarians, we can play a role to ensure that those that work with the hard sciences and study it, and other sciences obviously, actually have the right information to go forward. Because once you cite something that's incorrect, it can invalidate your whole study, and it can waste enormous amount of time and effort and possibly lose lives in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. You're 100% correct. And the sad thing is there's some evidence, some very recent studies that clearly show that even those retracted studies are still being cited. How do you cite a retracted study?
Yeah.
The biggest scandal I think science has faced in this past 7 to 8 years, researcher from South Korea, considered the leader in the field in stem cell research. One of his top papers was discovered that one of the pictures used was a duplication. He was fired from his university. All of his research is now being questioned, and it's probably regressed the field of stem cell research by a decade or two. What is our responsibility as researchers? But the even more difficult question, what is your responsibility as libraries to manage that?
Thank you, Prof. There's one question here and there's another one online that I'm going to read. Please go.
Thank you so much, Prof. Okay, I'm listening to what you have presented, which is very informative. I'm looking at, you mentioned the economic inequality, and that plays a big role because the majority of us is living in that state. And I'm looking at, I have a project that I'm doing with a community in the hostel, and I was looking at as well the climate change, the information that we have. That majority of our people are not able to receive such information. What is our take there? If I can put it that way, I'm putting you on the spot on this one. And as well as us as librarians, because one of the key aspects when I'm listening to climate change is the water shortage and food. And in that, I'm just addressing this widely. In that, I'm looking at how we behave in those poor community, if I can put it that way, in terms of not being considerate of what is coming or what is already here.
Yeah.
So what you are talking to us to say, we need to manage information effectively, but how do we disseminate this information effectively?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And don't speak about water shortage. I'm from the Western Cape. Way too soon. Day zero is still fresh in the mind. It is a very important question. I'm from UWC. The majority of our students are students who did not have access online or to equipment. We had to make that available. Even then, student would come back 2 days later because I was robbed on the taxi, on the train. I don't have the equipment anymore. So we had to be creative. We had to find central spots where we could make printed information available. We've pushed very hard, and fortunately we have a very proactive director of library that made the library a student-friendly zone where students could come virtually 24 hours a day to have access to internet. I think the majority of students globally at higher education institutions has a smartphone. So what have we done as a university? We've made data available. So the solutions are there. There's obviously a cost implication, but I think if we're serious about our role, then we need to be exploring those. So I think we have been creative, and just to summarize, so it's been making data available. In some cases, providing spaces on campus where they could come, and then in very rare cases to make hard copies available. That does not address all of the issues, and that's why we as science decided that we will be back onto campus for at least 70% face-to-face in our science modules. But it is a challenge, and that's why I dread when we have to go online when there are student protests, because we have students. So I do not have the answer, but we've tried to mitigate the impact by doing those things.
Yeah, sorry, Prof. Just to conclude, there was one question online that was asking, is the death toll not low because of lockdown measures? And maybe finally, if you can just give us maybe a bit of guidance in terms of wellness and mental health.
Okay.
As leaders, how do we support each other and our teams.
Thank you. I should not be asked about death tolls. I went kind of against mainstream because I'm a coronavirologist. So I was not very popular. So I ended up on none of the task teams. But fortunately, that allowed me to be in the public domain and engage with the public. So there's a positive to everything. The death toll, there's some estimates that says it's up to 20 million, not globally, not the current 7 million, just under 7 million that we see globally. I think the lockdowns in richer countries were very effective in controlling the spread. I am not convinced it had a huge impact in South Africa. Can I tell you anecdotally why? From the Western Cape. Day one, I think lockdown started on level 5, started on a Thursday. So I contacted my father-in-law who stays in Mitchell's Plain. For those of you who don't know, Colour Township. And I asked him, Dad, how's it going? This is day one of the lockdown. Nobody's outside. I live in Durbanville. People are even too scared to go into their yards. And he says, oh no, he's at a block party. Everybody came together, 5 or 6 streets, and everybody was having a party. The student did exactly the same. So was it effective? It was effective in principle. It wasn't practiced. So I'm not too convinced. But that's my opinion. Mental health, I think, is extremely important. You need to have clear boundaries. Know when you're working, and you need to know when to take your breaks, please. It's important for you, but it's also for your staff. We come to these type of functions, and even while we're dancing on the dance floor, we want to talk about work.
Yeah.
Define your boundaries and stick to your boundaries. I think any coach, any therapist, any psychologist would be very clear on that. You need to create those spaces where you break away, and I'm guilty of it as well, but you need to create those spaces that works for you. Mine is, I go running, and I just allow myself to think. I try not to process. And after 30 minutes, everything is gone. So find that space. Mental health issues are real. The time of us telling people, just get over it, it's not acceptable. So please, if you have, from a COVID perspective, if you have any of the comorbidities, so essentially anything that can increase your basal, your normal level of inflammation, please get tested. There's some very good treatments at this point in time. It's very likely not flu, could be flu, but look after yourself, please. I ended up in hospital for 12 days, 2021. Not ICU, but I needed oxygen. The good thing was I lost about 12 kilos. So yay, but physical health is important, but please identify your boundaries and stick to those boundaries. I think that's the best advice I can give you.
Thank you very much, Prof.